and welcome to the Posture Dojo podcast. My name is Sam Miller, and I'll be your guide on this postural transformation journey as I share some stories from my own healing journey of an 85-degree kyphoscoliosis and speaking with experts from a variety of fields, some fields you might expect and some that might be a bit more surprising. Today, I'm excited to have Brooke on the podcast, who has dove into a variety of fields that I think is getting closer and closer to nuggets of truth that will be invaluable to you on your journey as you harness the awareness of the way your body is structured and the way it responds to sound and movement. So, Brooke, what is exciting you right now in terms of discovering what we can tap into in our bodies?
What a beautiful question. I love that you started there. I look at the body like an instrument, and this instrument is a radio tower that can collect energy and information from things outside of it, just like our phone. And I see this instrument as a fine-tuned machine or a very discordant machine. So the strings of the body, just like this guitar behind me, I look at the strings of the body as the fascia. The fascia is what holds tension, and those tension of the strings go from the bottom of our feet all the way to the top of our head, and they're connected. So tuning the fascia so it doesn't hold tension to me is imperative because that's one piece of it. Now the breath is like strumming the instrument. So if you're breathing dysregularly with no rhythm and no melody across tense strings, the music that you're going to produce, because that influences our brain and then our brain will give us the response, the music will be ugly and discordant and potentially toxic. Now, if we look at ourselves like this instrument and we tune the strings to hold natural strength but no tension, just like we had as children, and we train the breath to be expansive in capacity, and we keep the lungs very clean, which is very easy to do with training, then we can breathe with a rhythm that can sequence our mind into very interesting brain waves. Right now in America, there's a lot of people living in a state of anxiety. And anxiety to me needs to be deconstructed. Anxiety is just a high brainwave pattern that you're experiencing because the fascia tension, the strings are too tense, and the breath is too irregular. When we take care of both of those things, the brain will automatically produce a different song. And this rhythm that we experience ends up being our life. So that's all still foundational stuff, Sam. Because once the strings are in tune and our breath has this extra capacity, that's when the fun begins. That's when there is this level called gamma that I believe we are meant to live in as seekers. Gamma brainwaves is experienced right now for a half second to 1 second, unless you are a heavily trained meditator. And I believe that there is going to be a sequence between the breath and the fascia tension. So the rhythm between these two, the song, and the studies of cymatics, which is how sound influences physical matter. So I've been playing with a sequence in order to hold gamma for longer and longer durations of time. But this is all still in its experimental process. And it's been really fun to have people interested in tuning the instrument.
What are goosebumps then? If the body is an instrument, what are goosebumps?
I call goosebumps the truth strings. I always feel like truth, whether you're ready for truth or not, it will hit you like a rebar, and that rebar will vibrate. So sometimes we don't want to hear the truth. Sometimes our mind's not ready for it. But when it hits us, I feel like the hair, when it stands up, it's telling us this is important to pay attention, that something here is very real, like extra electricity or magnetism in the air.
I'm recalling like grade 8, we went through and did a music lesson. That's when I really looked around and realized that I was not a good singer at that point. I guess from that point, I started telling a story. I'm not great at it. And I have a feeling a lot of it was connected with some of the postural things that are going on as you're like that unattuned internal structure, perhaps. And I've been curious about it because we've spoken about vocal coaching before here, how the jaw is connected to the pelvis, and then even in my own work, how we can extend the exhales, slow down the exhales in order to calm and regulate the nervous system. And then from my kind of beginner perspective, realizing a slow exhale is amazing to slow down the body. But what happens when we add sound to that and the vibration that happens to that? If our goal here is to release very deep tension of the mind and of the body, then these sounds, obviously shaking something is a great way to loosen and release it. So maybe there's something, even like, just to make sure everyone's up on the same page with us, is there something they can try at home right now when they're listening to the podcast, something they could do in their bodies to start wrapping their heads around where you're going with this?
Totally. All right, so let's try something. We're going to breathe wrong first, and then I'm going to show you where power comes from in the breath. Just as a reminder, most people suck at singing, even professionals at the highest level. If you're not consistently training, you lose control, because all of the sound that we produce comes from two little vocal fold flaps that are right here in the throat, right? And these vocal folds are like little drums. They're just like little skin flaps, and they're separate but together. We grow from the top down in the embryo, and then when that's established, when our mesoderm layers are formed, we have our pelvic floor, and then it comes up and it greets our vocal cords, very much like the Kundalini structure. There's actually a wrapping of it. Now, hitting a pure tone, a pure note, is when both of the vocal folds have the same exact symmetry. If one of the vocal folds is off a little bit, right? So this is just a matter of posture and structure. If it's off by a little bit, just a millimeter, you miss the note. So frequencies are fractions of a hair. So when we tell ourselves stories that I'm not a good singer, that's just like saying I can't do a jumping jack, or I can't run for 2 miles. It just takes some conditioning. And at the top end, every professional singer is training 5 days a week through agility exercises in order to condition these two vocal folds to act synonymously and with control so they can pop into the certain shapes. The interesting thing about the vocal folds is no matter the language, there's basically 5 vowel shapes. So even though we all speak different languages and we have different consonants and articulation and diction, we even resonate the tone differently, the sound is always coming from here. Now, what people don't realize is even a lot of singers that I work with, we're trained as a singer to have a chest voice, a head voice, a mixed voice, and a nasal voice. And in these areas, it's easier and easier to hit certain pitches. However, all the sound is coming from the vocal cords. These spaces are just where we're resonating the frequency off of. So in our bodies, we have empty cavities. And this is the easiest thing to experience in a stairwell. So if you stand in the center of a stairwell and hit a low note, and the higher the building, the better. If you can get into a 20-story building, it's very obvious. The low notes will hit the low floors. The high notes hit the high floors. But you're in the same spot. The frequencies that show where they hit is the same in our body. The low notes come out of our chest. The high notes come through our skull. So let's try this. We're just going to take a natural breath, however that looks like for you. And I want you to try to feel the note. Not hear it, just feel it. And I want you to hum the lowest note you can hit. Could you feel a vibration?
Yes.
Okay, where did you feel the vibration?
Just a belly button, just above the belly button.
Okay. Do you have a dog? Do you know how dogs like make that squeaky sound?
Which
or dolphins? Dolphins and
Sure.
dogs, they make that like sound, like it's almost through the skull.
Yeah.
I want you to try to make that sound best you can, and I want you to feel where the vibration is coming from.
It's more towards the top of the skull.
Yeah. So in old school opera singing, they would actually say that when you hit notes properly, you're hitting them at the top of your head. And you can actually train being tone deaf if you pay attention to where the frequencies are hitting you. Because when you miss a pitch, you'll feel it on one side of your body compared to the center. So pure centered tones is when we're singing our best. Now, let's try something else, because I love power used wisely, obviously. But with the voice, power is a very fun thing to learn how to do. And it's about learning to control the air pressure through the vocal cords. So the more air pressure I can punch through the vocal cords, the louder and bigger my sound is going to be. And at the best level, I vibrate my whole body. So sound is coming out of every pore of my being, not just my mouth. So when we do this properly, what we're doing is we're controlling the airflow within the body. So instead of just taking a breath and pushing the air out, we're going to take a breath with a shape within it. And when we exhale, we're going to reverse that shape, and we're going to push the air against the bottom muscle of the body. That's what allows us to hit a huge note for 30 seconds. All right, so okay. I'll give you the experience. I want you to just inhale in properly first. I want you to inhale and fill your chest, and then make a sound. You can hum, you can sing it, as long as you can. Okay, I'm gonna count. Still counting. Keep going. You breathed right. I was telling people to breathe wrong, but you're doing great. Keep going. We're at 34 right now. Let me know when you're done. This is a solid breath you took. 40. You must do breath training.
Okay.
Nice job.
Okay,
that was beautiful. That was way longer than expected. So for those of you that maybe felt like you could only hold the note for 8 seconds, we're going to try something else. I'm going to say breathe into your belly. There's no lung tissue in our belly. But what I'm cueing is to drop your diaphragm. So that our lungs, right, are these two very asymmetrical organs that live within the rib cage. And in our rib cage, we have our heart and our 2 lungs. That's it. Below them is this pump called the diaphragm. It's a U-shaped muscle that stabilizes the entire torso. So upper body posture is actually determined by how well you're using your diaphragm. And usually pelvic floor tone is also going to be massively contributed by proper breathing, because when we properly use the diaphragm, it falls all the way flat. The diaphragm is a very different muscle than what we have in the rest of the body. It's very wide and U-shaped, but it has 3 ridges within it. And when we learn to control it, you can actually push the sternum out separate from the sides, separate from the back. Just like a belly dancer, how belly dancers do those rolling things, that's practice of using the diaphragm. Now, as we exhale, the diaphragm pushes into the lung field, and as we inhale, it pulls down, allowing the lungs to expand. The other muscle group is the intercostals. Most people don't really feel these and don't realize we can control them, but there's 3 layers of muscles on the inside of the rib cage, between the ribs, and then on the outside. And that's why we have so much torso flexion. But when we learn to train them properly, we can actually expand the intercostals and contract them. And this gives our lung tissue significantly more room in the body, because our lungs are trapped within the rib cage. They're smushed against the exterior of our body. Now, most of us can hold 5 to 7 cubic liters of air in our lungs, right? The world record holders are holding 22 cubic liters of air. When we learn how to make these muscles of the intercostals and diaphragm more flexible, our lung tissue expands immediately. So to get to 14 cubic liters of capacity makes your breath incredibly powerful. It slows your natural and automatic breath rate. So I'm going to say breathe into your belly. What we're actually doing is pushing your diaphragm down.
Because it's like drawing the air in, right? Essentially, that is the breath. The diaphragm is creating a vacuum that is filled with air.
The lungs are a vacuum, and most people don't relate to it that way. There's even products out there for the lung tissue to strengthen the lung tissue where they're training people to mouth breathe, which I'm very against. And then they're looking at the lungs as this pressure vacuum. And it's so much simpler than that. It depends on the muscles around it. When we make room with the muscles, the lung tissue immediately inflates. But if you have somebody pushing on your body and you're trying to intake air, you're just stressing your system out. And that's how a lot of these little machines and gadgets are working, unfortunately. Yeah, when we're dropping the diaphragm down, we're going to feel like we're pushing the belly button out. But that's actually the diaphragm moving. And the lungs expanding. Now, the lungs are also conical shaped. So we have way more lung tissue and alveoli at the bottom of the lung field than the upper. So the shape of the breath, we inhale, we fill, in an advanced way, we fill the low belly, then the back of the low belly. Then we inhale, we fill the back, then the sides, then the chest. So it's a Fibonacci spiral from the nose into the low belly. Now, when we exhale from the chest, then the sides, then the back. So the belly is still out halfway through the exhale, okay? The belly's not moved. At the very end, we release the back of the belly and then the front of the belly. When you do that, it's so easy to breathe at one breath a minute because now you're not just taking a breath or a linear shaped breath. You're actually starting to open and control how the gas is moving in the lung tissue. And when we hold the air in the lower part of the lung tissue, we keep having oxygen dump into the blood. So I look at the upper lung field as a scuba tank for the lower lung field. And this is how us singers train. We push the air down because the diaphragm has so much more power. I can train 40 pounds on my diaphragm. So I can train the diaphragm to just stay out. So as I push the air down, the diaphragm has this ability to just help me control the air pressure. But the intercostals, if I exhale all my air from the bottom and I only have air in the upper chest, it's so difficult to squish the air out up here with any control. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let's help the people who are ready to breathe in the deeper, slower way.
So
yeah.
Inhale through the nose, fill the belly. Then fill the back of the belly. Just try. Inhale, fill the back. There's more room in there. Inhale, fill the sides. Inhale, fill the front. This first time, we're just going to stretch out. We won't make any sounds. Hold it out here. Don't clamp down on the hold. Inhale some more air. This should be the most air you've ever had in your body. When we're doing this, we're actually stretching the spine out as well. And if you can't open your arms up a little bit, this is going to open the intercostals. Now, exhale from the front of the chest. Try to keep the belly out. Then empty the sides, then the back. Keep the belly out. And then at the very end, release the belly. Now, you see how you naturally brought your arms down? That's actually an old school diva trick. So Whitney Houston, when she would belt notes, she would pull her arms up and then slowly drop them down because it helps you control your intercostals more. You're almost like physically pushing the air down. And this is how sighs are. So if you think of a nervous system regulation, when you sigh, you're breathing the best ever because you're exhaling from the top down. Yeah.
Love a good sigh.
I love sighs too. We're going to sing this time, and I want you to try to feel that same shape. Okay, you don't have to sing if you don't want to. I'll sing. I hope it comes through. Sometimes it gets blocked. Inhale, fill the belly. Back, sides, chest. Whatever note feels natural. I feel like you can hold your breath for so long. Do you know what your breath hold is? Keep going, keep going. You see there's a lot more control on the bottom. Yeah. You're crushing it. I can't hear a single note that you're hitting, but I'm assuming it's wonderful.
There we go. Nice. Yeah, definitely more control, definitely more stability in the sound, I think.
Mm-hmm. The trick that I teach my singers is to do that exercise when you're laying on the ground flat and you put a weight on your tummy. That's an old school opera trick. And the heavier the weight, when you hit that note, you want the weight to stay up. So you're training your diaphragm to resist collapsing. So it's a way that you can belt the note into your ceiling and then measure your progress. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So to recap there, we're inhaling into the belly. I guess we're feeling as low as we can, and then we're feeling towards the back, and then we're feeling towards the sides, and then we're checking if there's any room in the front again to inhale. And then we're exhaling again from the bottom.
Chest.
From the chest?
No, from the top. Yeah. So we fill the bottom of the lung tissue first because it's the most underused part of the lung tissue, and it has the most amount of capacity to drop oxygen, to continue to dump oxygen into the bloodstream. So if you were in the beginning, when I teach people, I teach a linear breath. So you fill the bottom, then you fill the top. When we exhale, we empty the top, then we empty the bottom. And as people advance, we get deeper and deeper into this spiraling shape of the body.
So walk us through that spiral, inhale and exhale, because I think that's a great nugget for people to get.
Yeah. When we do this, when you can feel the muscles and make these muscles flexible, everything becomes easier. So in the beginning, some people are like, I can't feel that. And it's like, nobody can in the beginning. We're talking about the little interstitial things.
There's
so
no
it's all about
pathways there
trying.
yet from the brain to the body.
Yeah, you just got to keep trying. And that's why I love when people lay down, because you can feel the back and the ribs start to expand against the ground. So the earth becomes almost this container for you to feel the ribs expand. So we're going to try again the shape of the breath. So inhale through the nose, push your belly button all the way out. When that's out, hold the air there, inhale more, fill the back. So don't move the air, but more air. Then inhale, fill the back up slowly from the bottom. Then expand your sides. Fill that up. Then inhale more, fill the chest. Swallow once. Inhale some more. Now hold. We're going to just hold for 10 seconds. But in the hold, if you clamp down, you're going to feel back pressure behind your ears. But if you expand, you'll actually be training your intercostals to open, which takes time. And then when we release, I want you to exhale slowly with control. Empty the chest, keep the belly out. Empty the sides, keep the belly out. Empty the back, keep the belly out. Nice and slow, yeah. At the very end, empty the belly. Now, to start gaining control of these muscles, not only do we need to expand them, but we need to contract them. So there's the opposing exercise, and anybody that works out really loves the concept. If you're going to work this part of the muscle, you got to work the opposite part of the muscle. That's what balance is. Take a recovery breath, okay? And then on your next natural exhale, I want you to pull your belly button to your spine. This one's a little tougher, okay? Now, your lower intercostals, I want you to squish your lower rib cage in, making your midsection as tiny as humanly possible. Then lift the belly button, okay? We're going to hold here for 10. Now, this is like a stomach vacuum with a couple extra cues. When you're lifting the belly button, we're pulling the diaphragm in. Now try to pull the belly button to your spine. So lift up and then pull back. Then lift up higher and then pull forward with the belly button. It's subtle. All right, and then you can release. So I like to call that the minimum capacity, but by gaining control over the contraction, we end up learning how to expand. So most people have an easier time first contracting the intercostals, and then in the contraction, you learn expansion. And this is huge in rock and roll because in opera, you have time between notes to get ready for your next belt. But in power metal, you have a second, if you're lucky, to get ready for the next verse. So a lot of metal singers, they actually have to rehearse so that they're taking an inhale at the exact same spot because there's not enough recovery time. So they plan their recovery moments. And I train something called the 1 second inhale. And as an athlete, it's an incredible recovery to take your heart rate from super palpation to back to regular. But as a singer, it's invaluable because if you're rapping or a power metal singer, you have a half second before your next verse. So you can, when you train this way, you can inflate to your maximum capacity in a half second. Yeah. And in order to do, we actually tone the nasal glands and we tone the esophagus. So posture when you're doing breath exercises like this is essential because we want everything to be able to inflate rapidly. And to do that, we have to get very comfortable with expanding the lower lung tissue because that's what's usually really underused with people. And underused lung tissue collects particles. When they do a cadaver, you'll see that there's particles stuck in the lungs, like dirtiness, right? But it's completely asymmetrical. So you can see their breath pattern that they normally had because that lung tissue will be really pinkish and beautiful. And then on the outside edges where the lung tissue gets smashed against the intercostals and at the bottom, there's a collection of dirtiness. Just by learning to breathe into these. Yes, precisely.
Which is, part of another reason why I believe flow is an amazing kind of checkpoint or audit for wellness and health in the body, right? Wherever there's flow, there is health, there is life, there is energy.
There's life.
If there's the opposite, if there's that stagnancy, if we're not getting into these areas, and perhaps this is a good time to mention or I guess share a perspective of someone who may have an imbalanced posture, because this type of work that we're doing is what that we're talking about here is like it's an overall, it can heal a lot of things in a lot of different dimensions of mind and body. It's a very holistic approach. And so when I'm looking at postural reconstruction and helping people, empowering people to rebuild their highest posture, oftentimes they've been living for many years, so if they're in their 20s or 30s, they've been living with some type of sideways scoliosis, a derotation, a hyperkyphosis. They've got different curves that have happened, and their muscles and their fascia and their entire bodies, but primarily the muscles and fascia have compensated so much. There's some that are more tense, that are more chronically tightened, and sometimes that can reduce the flow of information to that area because it's held and it's been fatigued and it's been aching for so many years. It just decided to disconnect from the brain and just be there, tightened and condensed. I know I've had to deal with that a lot. And then there's other areas that we haven't had to use, and they don't have these neuromuscular pathways because they just haven't needed to be recruited as much as they normally would. So in my healing process, a way to describe it most accurately is that I'm reestablishing or re-educating very large parts of my body to fire correctly at the right time when I need it, especially in the core. Having severe kind of vertebrae curves through the body. The core is such a tricky one to get at, to see, to understand, to visualize. So many different layers going on. But the breath is something that, regardless of any of that, seems to always guide us in a good direction when we are breathing fully. And even in those exercises, I had a couple really nice alignments, like physical alignments of the spinal column through those breaths. One of the beginner breaths that we go through is the 3 balloon breath. And that's learning and helping provide this visualization, providing the ability for the brain to imagine that you can breathe into the front, into the back, and into the sides. Like just that instruction from the brain is an amazing one to practice as we go about learning to use with things like the Schroth method, which is rotational angular breathing, essentially pressurizing one side of your rib cage to derotate and counter that rotation that happens in the scoliosis. It's essential to start learning, okay, we can breathe to the sides and to the back, and when we understand, the better we can visualize and see the form of the spinal column and the rib cage in our bodies, the better we can then use our understanding of the diaphragm, use our understanding of how we can inflate and pressurize to create that alignment, and also to release these tensions that we have, because the breath, like that, those longer breaths are from a more relaxed structure, right? If there's more tightness in there, we're not going to be able to increase our capacity, as you were mentioning. So that another reason why I'm loving freediving right now as a practice to go deeper into that understanding and a deeper relationship with the breath and its effect in the body.
I have lots of respect for freedivers. The lungs shrink in half from the compression when you're like 10 feet, I think, 10 or 20 feet underwater. So the freedivers, to me, they take the cake for the most strategic sequences in order to reach goals. If you want to go 100 feet underwater and hold your breath for 5 minutes, you have to check off all these boxes and collect your data and prove that you can do it, and do squats while you're holding your breath. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the freediver technique. And then for Boudico, in the breathwork world, I feel like there is a lot of charlatans, but Boudico breath is fantastic for respiratory illnesses. But freedivers, to me, you guys are risking your lives with that.
Yeah, so
it's epic training.
Yeah, I'm beginner in the sport of freediving. I consider it more of I live in Tulum a lot of the time, so the cenotes there are beautiful, and just being able to dive deeper there, and that state of being is really rewarding. And then also spearfishing, which adds an extra primal hunting
athletic
to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now you're chasing something underwater. As a recording artist and a performer, I love power, and power comes from this ability to control your air pressure. So to me, who I really look at for breathwork teachers truly is the freedivers, the Boudico teachers that are curing respiratory illnesses, and the singers. Those to me are the three that are actually using the breath. Working the actual breath.
And what's your intention with the breath? You're putting messages out there, you're empowering people. What mission are you on there?
I want to bring us to gamma. I am very much wanting to live in a culture of creative problem solvers. I'm a little, and I'm sure you can feel this way too, I'm a little taxed by the anxious victim mindset. I feel like there's a lot of people looking for other people to solve their problems. And if the world is going to explode, if there will be an apocalypse, who's going to be able to think clearly and creatively in chaos? If everything were to fall apart, we would be divided right back up into little lords and lady kingdoms. And people would follow those that understand how to creatively think under pressure. And it would be great to live in a culture where everyone could tap into that. And as an artist, there's so much conversation. I was a muralist for a while and a recording musician. I've been writing music since I was a kid. And there is this conversation about being able to write and that inspiration. The word enthusiasm means possession by God. And artists often have their own quips about this feeling of enthusiasm that possesses you to a point where you can't sleep until the work is done. And you don't need to eat, you don't need to sleep, the body doesn't exist. You are moved by an energy that's flowing through you as a fire hose of a force. And a lot of writers will say around full moon, or when I do this and this, I can tap into that state, and then it dries up and they feel stagnant. And for me, this is a brainwave frequency. This is a very measurable frequency that we're talking. Inspiration is measurable. And to get there has been a very big misunderstanding, in my opinion, because as I've been seeking, I have found that inventors across the last handful of centuries have used rituals in order to access that state of mind. So particularly Edison, Tesla, Benjamin Franklin, Henry Ford, and then a number of brilliant women, Heidi Lamar, they would say that they would have these ideas, and when they were in the process of creation, they felt usually very alone. Could you imagine being next to Benjamin Franklin as he was inventing the light bulb and being like, hey, Johnny, this is my 5,000th try chasing something that's never been done. What's your thought? Like that, Johnny's annoyed by Ben. So they were alone often as researchers in their own desire to unveil this next reality. And they would bring the problem to their mind and then drop into a meditative state. And when you look at the sequence, there's this thing that happens when we allow ourselves to let go of the result and drop into theta. So the brain waves were mostly operating in beta. Right underneath beta is alpha. That's 8 to 15. That's where most meditations bring us. It's when we're still using language cueing, we're controlling the neurons, we're using projection. But right beneath that is theta, and that's where we are as children. Now, theta, when we can maintain theta and let go of a problem, our neurons have the ability to connect new neurons. So new pathways can be made in this creative brain that we have. So when we can bring a problem to our mind, let the problem go, we stop trying to to solve it along the highways that have already been made, right? When we drop into theta, we have more ability to tap gamma. And the way that these inventors would do it is famously Edison and Franklin would hold a tennis ball and they had a napping chair and they would just sit, and when the tennis ball would drop, it would wake them up slightly, and then they would have a new idea. Whether it would be the working solution, at least it was a new idea. It was something forward. And I know that if I can teach people how to access theta, they're going to be able to make that jump more and more often. So I use the breath to get people into theta. And if they can let go of theta in a relaxed, clean body, we have the chance to make this jump to gamma. But you can imagine if something were to happen, if chaos were to ensue, who knows how to toggle switch the brain? This is essential information, in my opinion, for artists, for athletes, for problem solvers, for people who want to make the world a better place. We have to be able to think outside of the box. We have to be able to connect new and creative ideas. And this is done by using our brain like the engine it is. It's a frequency machine that lives in our head. And we are using it to stay throttled into anxiety, which is just a BPM, like a hertz of 28 to 30, usually marries the breaths per minute around 28 to 30 breaths per minute. So if we want to drop this to 4 to 7, we can drop this to 4 to 7. And if the tension of the body is relaxed enough, we can handle more voltage. That's the indicator with the fascia. If the fascia is free, this becomes a radio tower. And really, who knows what we're capable of at that point.
I hear you following your enthusiasm for many years in many different fields and staying in the process. I don't see you attached to that output of, oh, it's this thing this work that I'm creating. It seems like you're just in it and you're listening and you're articulating it. Where and how can people tap in and learn from you about these types of things?
I have been lecturing about the brain and breath connection for a long time, and about 5 months ago I filmed it, and it's on my website at musicalbreathwork.com. And that film to me is a working thesis. That is the construction of where I'm going. And really it's foundational, because once we get that, there's a whole other enchilada to unwrap. But the brain and breath connection is available as a lecture film. I actually cover a ton of exercises in it. So I always tell people, if you're smart and you take notes, I give away a lot of my secret sauce within that lecture. The feedback that I got from that film, it actually I sold hundreds of copies around the world, and I was surprised to find that 50% of my audience was outside of America. And I have an international business degree. So I was like, wow, finally, I'm using my degree. So based on their feedback, I made a secondary course that was more of a walkthrough about the fascia. And I'll be releasing my breath course here in the next 3 weeks. That will be a sequence of a walkthrough. So the science of the breath, the physiology of it, and then how to train, some frequently asked questions so that people can just log on, click play, and they don't have to work with me one-on-one. They can just start moving through the sequences. And I'm a very big efficient person. So the fascia sequence that I made, it's 20 minutes a day of a commitment. It doesn't matter where you start. I built it for a 90-year-old and a 9-year-old. And the same with the breath. It's 10 minutes a day. And I'm a little cocky about it because I've been doing breath work for 10 years. So I tell people, I'm like, I can double your breath capacity in 6 weeks. And I'm almost at a point where I'm like, we can guarantee it. If people train 5 days a week, I'm going to double your breath hold. That's just the way it is. It's basic physiology.
What are you doing to the fascia? Because the fascia, from what I heard once, that it was only officially diagnosed as our largest organ in 2017, which means most of our lives we've been going to doctors who have not been officially trained in this, and now are probably catching up and trying to figure out, like, okay, what does it actually do? Yeah,
those doctors are on my page yelling at me. I'm the cop.
What's your current definition of fascia, and maybe some adjectives of what you like to do with the fascia?
So I was a golfer, and as a golfer, I'm a 5 foot, 105 pound woman, and I wanted to hit the ball as far as I could so that I could play on the LPGA. So for 7 years, my obsessive brain, 1,000% golf. And in golf, by studying momentum, I was grateful enough to be around David Ledbetter, who in the golf world is the king. His main researcher is Michael Bentley. Michael Bentley is the inventor that is just put Ledbetter on this other upper tier. He invented the K-Vest and the PEDAR system. So I was around the invention of the PEDAR system, which is how you measure the weight movement of your foot during the golf swing. And he invented a formula. I'm huge on formulas. I think everything can basically be deduced to math about momentum through the swing. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was training fascia. And by learning it's called ground force reaction, is the way that I learned how to swing the golf club. And it's very kung fu. There's very little wasted motion in my swing. If you would look at my swing compared to one of those long drive hitters, I can hit the crap out of the ball, but there's almost no wasted motion. And it's because momentum is driven from the floor. So I'm trying to push against the earth, and this creates a chain reaction through the system that allows momentum to build measurably. So if I can push 200 pounds on my left foot while my club is here, I'm going to hit the ball 275 yards. It's basic physics. So when I injured myself, because I have been training like an elite athlete since college, I hurt my foot. And I feel like a lot of fascia people have found themselves in it because they were resolving an injury. I feel very lucky that I had hurt my foot, because most fascia release techniques out there are focused on the pain. They're focused on the symptom of something and then trying to trace it through the body. When you start at the foot, everything in the body changes. So when we look at the skeletal structure, right, the foot has 26 bones in it. The whole leg only has 4 bones in it. Then we have our hips. Now, from the hips, there's a whole new set of fascia bands that start. So they're connected, but they're all connected from the hips. So if we look at my guitar, we have the nuts on top here. This is my tuning pegs. And then at the base, we have the bridge. So the foot is the bridge. Everything else, so if we actually, let me break this up a little bit different. If we look at your hips as the bridge at the very bottom, and we look at this like the top, so that's your spine. Dr. B.J. Palmer, who invented Western chiropractic for us, he was saying that we could recalibrate the spine from the top down. And he was obsessed with how the skull sat on top of the spine, saying that this is the way the nervous system is. All the vertebrae should self-correct based on how the skull sits on the spine, and the top 2 bone of our spine are built very differently than the rest of the spine. Now, I was devoted to that mindset until I hurt my foot. And I was like, what if we flipped it upside down? What if we released the fascia. And I invented a fascia release technique that my grandma could use. So my technique's very gentle. That's been my issue with the fascia releases. If I'm an athlete training and I go do a rolfing session, I can't train for a few days because my body needs to heal from all of the bruising and shearing. Same with cupping, same with acupuncture. These are not fast recovery systems. So I wanted something that I could do to maintain my fascia and still train hard. So I use a gentle compression technique that simulates a myofascial massage with someone's elbow, but you can do it at home. But we start from the feet. And in doing so, we're actually retuning the hips. So I tell people we're not going to touch your upper body until your lower body tension is dropped by 80%. Because if you have a ton of tension in your lower body and it's tweaking your hips, it's going to change the entire fascia tuning of the upper body. In the upper body, the fascia bands are so much closer to the surface that it's very easy to tweak the spine outside of the hip. So when I was starting to play with this technique, I actually hurt myself and I hurt my ex-partner by accident. We both threw our backs out for a significant period of time because we focused on a pain spot and released it, not realizing that pain spot was a consequence of us trying to calibrate straight. So we release it from the ground up in my technique, and it's my obsession with tensegrity, it's my obsession with floating compression, it's my obsession with ground force reaction. We walk on our feet. If we walked on our hands, we would start with our hands. But because this tension is set with every single step we take, when we release it from there, things like chronic knee pain go away. Bunions start to reverse. Hip pain goes away. And then by the time the hips are clear, people's shoulders have already popped back into place. The tension headaches that came from the side of the neck, once the lateral band is fully released, there's no more of that. The TMJ goes away because all of this stuff in my philosophy is from lower body tension.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
And more. There's in a compromised spine or a compromised posture, there's a decompression that happens. And again, one of those stories that you tell yourselves when you're younger was like, I can't jump very well. But it was actually just I had compressed fascial chains throughout the body here. And living with a kyphoscoliosis at 33, and when my body started shutting down and something was wrong and I didn't quite know what, my intuition, the first thing I remember doing was I woke up at 5 a.m. and I'm like, go for a walk and get those barefoot shoes. At the time, the Vibram 5 fingers were the only ones. Vibrams. But it was like, yeah. And my body was calling for that. It was calling for this activation of the full chain from the toe up. And then since then, getting into, some of the toe spaces, obviously more barefoot walking, and then now the myofascial release, which is so nice and satisfying now when you hear this crinkling. So because we can release the fascia, but we can also, you were saying, train the fascia. So let's get a kind of an idea of what can be done with the fascia.
All of that is still being unpacked, and it's fascinating to just witness it, because in the information age, our opportunity is we can call China and say, what are your doctors studying and how are they talking about it? So there's this discrepancy right now between American, German, and Chinese doctors about what this fluid that the fascia is moving. So remember, fascia is a triple helix collagen fiber, so it's in a circular tubular shape, and there's fluid moving through it and then around it. Fascia therapists, which have really were started by Dr. Ida Rolf in the late 1800s, early 1900s. She was the one, in my opinion, that brought massage therapy to the next level. She required her students to study hardcore physiology. She required a lot of biology. So a lot of her approach is still carried on now. And what the real game changer in my concept is in 2018, Dr. Carla Stecco released new studies about the cells that exist within the fascia called the fibroblasts and the fibrocytes. And these fibrocytes are capable of producing more hyaluronic acid, which is the fluid that glides the fascia over each other. So I got obsessed, per usual, with what would activate these fibrocytes, because in Dr. Ida Rolf's concept and a lot of the concepts that were adopted after, when you find a fascia adhesion, which is where they're stuck together, you rip it apart. So motion is better than no motion, right? But I want to keep training. So how could we not rip it apart, but how could we rebound it so that it would come back to a circular shape, because it's collapsed like this. So I started looking at it as this isn't a biomechanical structure with tension. This is a hose that's not moving the current it needs to move. How can we make this hose come back online? And by asking a lot of those questions and doing a lot of reading, I found a very simple way to incorporate heat, hydration, time, compression, sequentially moving along the fascia grains, which you don't get in a massage. In a massage, there's, they start at different places, they focus on pain spots, they're not going to hold the compression as long. You don't have any control. So it brings relief to people, but we're not getting into the deep tissue. I want to be able to heal my fascia from the deep tissue. I want the results to stay. What I'm realizing is the results are maintenance. This is much more like brushing our teeth. So I just got done an experiment where I did 3 weeks, because I was at a point where I was like, okay, I'm mostly clear. How long will it take for them to come back? And it took 3 weeks with my normal training regimen with it. And so I'm looking at this like, this is brushing our teeth, folks. Like, this is a maintenance exercise that needs to be adopted in order to keep our structure nice and clean and safe. So when we train the fascia, I usually use toe mobility exercises, because as we want the fascia to open, we start with the foot. If the foot's clammed up, all this fascia is glued together. So as we open the foot, we want to also empower these muscles to stay separate. So we start to teach toe dexterity again. That also reconnects the brain all the way down to the foot. This makes our walking better, our jumping better, our running better. It takes pressure off of all of the joints. So as we start to tune the fascia of the foot and we strengthen these muscles, it's easier and easier for our body to hold and maintain the good work that we're doing. That's why after about 6 to 9 months, this is just a maintenance routine. Once you clear the old damage, now we're just going to maintain that. We don't have to have long-winded routines ever.
So you imagine, because there is different layers of fascial material as well, but you're imagining the fascial chain, or the ones that you're interacting with, as cords, and those cords get flattened essentially, and so you're restoring their cylindrical shape through movement.
Yeah, it's almost like braids through the system, because the fascia touches everything. That's what the German centers are really saying. It's, you guys, this is going into the cells. This is why the mitochondria can divide. It's not just, so myofascia, when people say myofascia, myo means muscle. It's the fascia around the muscle. And what our studies have shown us now is that there was actually a huge problem with how we were looking at pathology. So there's this doctor, he's been a 25-year pathologist. He's been studying, blood and tissues on top of these microscopic discs. And then you put this up, and then there's these varying striations in it. And these striations were always acknowledged as one thing. And what he's saying now is, you guys, this is fascia. For the last 30 years, we've been doing pathology wrong. And because of him saying we've been doing it wrong, and this is why we need to go back to the drawing board, I believe he was one of the main people that's starting to bring together a lot of different minds. There's the medical industry around America alone, let alone internationally, has been very segmented. There is not holistic health in the medical industry. And I feel like the fascia is actually starting to create this really intense conversation between fitness professionals that are actually working with the body. As much as I love Dr. Carla Stecco, she has no concept of how to condition the fascia in the body, but she could tell me all about it, about a dead body. So there's this little bit of a confusion between doctor to fitness instructor. Or, to me, what is a great story about fascia is that it's actually, everything was really birthed by Dr. Stephen Levin. So we've known about it since the Leonardo da Vinci first made illustrations of it back in the first Grey Anatomy's book, right? But we didn't catch up with it as a tensile strength, like a radio tower, right? Until Dr. Stephen Levin. And he was inspired by Kenneth Snelson and Buckminster Fuller, who are artists and architects. It's a philosophy of how do we hold structure? Where does strength come from? How do we condition the strength? And to me, this is still too biomechanical, because what's coming out of the Chinese research, and I know this sounds like I'm all over the place, but the conversation around fascia is very much still all over the place. The Chinese doctors are saying the fluid moving through the fascia tubes is the life force because it's carrying an electrical current. Now, if we just look at even hyaluronic acid, which is the fluid right outside of the cells, right? Hyaluronic acid is an acid molecule that can house 1,600 water molecules. And people forget this, but water is H2O. There's double the amount of hydrogen atoms compared to oxygen. That makes it electrostatic. Hydrogen carries an electrical charge. So our system runs on this repulsion network, almost like a bunch of little water magnets that are pushing each other from polars. Does that make sense? So as our body, as we experience these adhesions, although we can think of them like, oh, our bands are stuck together, no, there is an electrical current that is impaired and impinged. And when you see a cadaver, this to me is the link between how we pull the research into constructive functional fitness for ourselves, right? Which the doctors won't cover for the next 20 years. I watch all of these things and I'm like, okay, so then now what do we do with that information? Because there's nothing functional from it. It's just information a lot of the times. And then to take that information and to apply it to the body, the gap has been art. These doctors will show slides of the fascia and the fascia in different forms, and the fascia in dead people, the fascia in living people, how the fascia bands are moving on a living person. There's been some horribly grotesque experiments that I've watched, but all gave me a better mindset of how these bands are sliding over each other. And what I've realized is that, so when you take apart a cadaver, the veins collapse. So even though the veins are tubular, right, they can completely collapse. They can completely flatten. So if you think of the fascia has all of these geometric shapes within it, it's fractal. The fascia is fractal. The way it's connected, it's like a little spider web. So if you have knots in a spider web, how do you unknots? This has been my question that's propelled me through the rabbit hole. How do you untie knots in a spider web without breaking the spider web? So
beautiful question.
I have a sequence. Yeah. So I built a sequence that it's 8 rules. And if you've missed one of the rules, it's not going to work. So in the 8 rules, we take the spider web and instead of ripping it or trying to untangle that spot, we compress it. And in the compression, when we meet all of the 7 other rules and we do the 7 other rules correctly, we're going to activate the piezoelectric current to stimulate the fibrocytes to make the fluid to rebound the tissue properly. And the crazy part is it works and you can feel it. You might not feel it the first 10 sessions, but then you eventually feel it because we're conditioning the tissues to reactivate this current and make this acid over and over. So there's no bruising, there's no tearing. You can train the next day. Your body feels better. We release the tension. You could do it at home. But it's all about this current. And really, if we take it to the next level, Sam, this electrical current emits a magnetic field, and people aren't even all the way established in their current. So imagine people that have numb parts of their body where the current is completely impinged and they're breathing at 25 breaths a minute, okay? And they're trying to meditate. That person's not going to get to gamma. The person that has a free flowing electrical capacity within the system that can reduce their breath, I like to say less than 4, but really it's 1. But less than 4 feels better for people. So it's just less than 4. And we pair those 2 things together. And then you add sitting under old trees, or you add taking a walk on the beach in the morning. Now we're charging this electrical current. Now our voltage is unimpinged. How big can our magnetic field get? This is all a quantifiable, coherent system, but we have to work with this radio tower that's emitting these fluids and moving these fluids.
may be why like sitting down and cross-legged is like already a huge impingement to the experience of meditation, and why it can be difficult for many people to do that.
Right.
From my understanding, there are these fibroblasts and fibroclasts, which are these collagen protein mechanisms constructing and deconstructing, and so you're essentially working with those to reconstruct or reconfigure how the fascial lines go through your body. And that's awesome. Is that the crinkling sound that we can hear when we do get that alignment or that reconstruction?
It depends what you mean by crinkling. Is it a crunchy feeling, like you're passing over something crunchy, or is it the breakdown of that crunchy?
It's like a soda can being crinkled and uncrinkled.
Wow, that's so interesting you would describe it that way. I can't relate to that. To me, I experience the shift. Like when it happens, when I can feel that spider web compress and I follow the rules and it releases, I define it as like a melting pop. It melts, but there's a pop to it. There's not really a good word for the experience. Okay. But it is alchemy. And then it's gone. That thing that you were just all the way concerned about, and it disappears. And it's funny because people are always trying to milk me for information on how to do it. And I was like, you have to buy the course, because this spider web connects to things. And some people will be like, I have 30 like little chunky spots in this area, in this section. And I say often, you don't have 30, you have 5 deep ones. And if you think of a spider web, if you have 5 really intense knots, those knots are going to open holes in other spots of the spider web. And then those fibrous sites and like those pieces of our fascia will reestablish it. So we'll feel little tiny, tender, achy, sore spaces on the outside, but they're all being spawned from these deep ones. And when we take care of those deep ones, the whole spider web rebounds. So there's a way to move through this sequence and have it not work for you because you're focusing on the outside. Or there's a way to move through the sequence, and when you do it correctly, we just greatly impact the entire system.
Who else out there was putting this together? And I asked that because you said it was coming from a lot of different fields, and I feel like it's people like you that have these range of different experiences that provide the ability to look at this holistically and acoustically to connect all these dots. I see you collecting dots, and whether they have any consequence now or not, eventually at some point they seem to kind of form part of this kind of perspective and mosaic of understanding that you're forming. So I think absolutely it is an offering that is extremely valuable to people, even though they may not see that value yet, because they'll see value to paying thousands of dollars to a specialist or an orthopedic surgeon who has a very specialized kind of field of knowledge. But there's so much that we can be doing at this holistic level, and it takes this range of experiences to be able to approach it well, as you do.
Thank you. There's a lot of people that said I'm not inventing anything. This has been done in yoga for centuries. There's some people that have approached me from New Zealand saying that they're going to offer this equation as a biomarker for AI. So I'm in a trademarking conversation right now with lawyers, because even though it may have been brushed on upon literature, my answer is, okay, show me the equation they built. I'm an equation person. I love breaking things down to equation. Even when I did big murals, I could create my own color palettes because of how I divided paints and then remixed them. So this is just how I love to move through life. Very much inspired by a lot of the doctors that I've had a chance to research with. And then people don't realize, but fascia is really was like promoted by non-doctors. A lot of the cutting edge stuff is coming from researchers. So Tom Myers, one of the biggest names, he's the one that has 4 textbooks on the subject matter. He's not a doctor. He speaks like one, and his textbooks are incredibly difficult to read. And Even his lectures themselves do not pander to an untrained mind. However, he's just a researcher. Ashley Black, who came out with the Fascia Blaster, she was told that she was just going to have early onset rheumatoid arthritis and she could take pain meds, and she was in her 20s. And she's no, thank you. I'm an athlete. I'm going to keep training. And she invented her own way around it. Coach Chong Zi, he was a Brooklyn basketball coach 10 years ago. Now hyperarch fascia training. I've witnessed him. I found his research very early on, and then he has exploded in the last 2 years. And it's so wonderful to see, because he's just a researcher trying to asking questions and then being propelled through the invention of the question. So he just actually co-founded a new invention that palpates the fascia. Because in my equation itself, which is what prompted my explosion online, is your breaths per minute equals your brain waves over your heart rate variability plus the condition of your fascia. Right now, there's really not a way to measure the condition of your fascia. However, the Fascia Institute, which is just now coming online, is finally, and I've been saying this for months, they're finally using ultrasound technology to show where the densifications are happening in the fascia. Now, how they're treating it, not into it at all. However, they're finally able to measure, and I don't know how we're going to quantify that into a number, but to me, it's a sequence. It's a sequence between all of these things. This is how the electricity moves through us. This is how we're going to sustain a healthier magnetism outside of ourselves. This is how we're going to toggle switch our brain waves. All, to me, very foundational, but inspired by so much. And there's this one, and just another teacher, he was just a researcher back in the early 1900s, Arnold Ehret. He built an equation about vitality. And to him, vitality equals obstruction minus energy, or energy minus obstruction, I'm sorry. So you have full vitality and full energy if you have no obstructions. Yeah. So beautiful. He defined obstructions very deeply. And for him, it was just, wow, we remove obstruction from the system and we experience higher energy. And he built a fasting protocol around that, helped thousands of people before he mysteriously died. I do not accept his death as he had a blunt injury to the back of his skull. And they were like, oh, he just died. Come on, guys. He just got done a lecture with a standing ovation of 500 people and then died of a blunt injury to the back of his skull. How interesting.
Institutions love numbers. So I do feel that is a key piece to bringing this mainstream, right? Something that is measurable, that's much more likely to get on a doctor's desk, is something that can be prescribed and then measured, and you can track the results. But obviously, compliance is one of the hardest ones. Compliance, getting the patient to actually go through with the protocol or their diet or the regimen. So that's why they usually just end up with surgery or pills, because pills are so easy and surgery is something easy. They can do without compliance. So that's why they always end up going, so that they can show they've gone from point A to point B, and they've got numbers like KPIs. Same thing for businesses, right? Like when it's measurable, it can be managed, and that's how the modern medical system seems to work as well. But I get the feeling after all of this hoo-ha, I feel like we're all going to end up jumping around the fire, chanting in community. Is that where this all ends up?
I really think so. And I've been having these conversations with my marketing team and strategists, and they're like, we can help a lot of people over 50. And I'm like, I'm interested in working with people who identify as champions. I'm interested in working with people who are athletic, who are performing artists, who identify as, I want to solve my problem. I know my body can fix my problem. And whatever the medical community does, it's going to be slow and it's going to be long. And I'm not interested in it. But I am very much interested in living in a culture where people identify as creative problem solvers who understand how to create stillness within themselves amongst chaos. And to me, the prime example of that is when a performing artist walks out on stage, is in front of thousands of people, and instead of identifying as anxiety, they know exactly how to bring themselves down. And it's the same thing for the athlete that steps out onto the court or the field or the course, whatever they may call it.
Into the light.
And yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of my stuff has come from failure. As a golfer, I had all the shots in my bag, and I would really sabotage that 2-foot putt. I can't tell you in my senior year how many 2-foot birdie putts I had missed. It was just mind-numbing, and it was always from my adrenaline dump. So part of what brought me
of the external
full
eyes
circle,
on you, of the pressure of the situation.
I didn't have the stage fright. I'm a Leo. I've been on stages since I was a kid. Thanks to my parents, I've been like all the musical theater stuff and got very comfortable throwing my voice very young. But I was uncomfortable with the attachment to the result. In golf, it's, you know, if you get attached to making it, there's tension. There's part of your body. It's funny because it's very fascia. I didn't realize how much golf and fascia are intertwined, because I could make that same putt 1,000 times, right? And you can put $100,000 on the line for it, which is what I see on the big tours. Or you can put, in my opinion, it was sponsorships. It was, if I win this, then I can, yada. And that dialogue creates tension. Because now my consciousness is divided. Now my breath rate, for me, I think it was my breath rate. So I would be playing so well, and the next thing you know, I'm breathing at 30 breaths a minute, or I'm holding my breath, or I'm, however it is, when the adrenaline hit, I was in panic attack mode. I could hit the ball so far, but to just make the 2-foot putt, it's, come on, I've done this 1,000 times. And then it's hard. You miss your 2-foot birdie putt, you turn around and sink the par, and then you go to the next tee box and you feel like you lost. You feel like how do I let go of that mistake? I just did all that work to get to that spot, and then I blew it there. Okay, now you have to recenter. It's such a meditative sport. It's so internal. And music is too. When you mess up on stage, there's this pocket of time that you have to dialogue with yourself. As a musician, you just look at your buddies and you're like, nobody heard that, right? So if I'm just playing an instrument, it's just you and your bandmate, like nobody heard that, right? But if you're singing and then you miss the note, everybody can hear a missed note from a singer. We're all so attuned to the human voice. So if I'm ready to belt a note and I miss that note, and then I have another one to hit, you can be flooded with what we call anxiety. And what I've learned is, okay, what I would do is I would take a deep breath. I would look at my bandmate and then let another measure come back, and then drop back into the zone. But you had to release the failure, release the mistake, release how your body was holding on to it.
The intention of protection, or the intention of something that isn't. That's my definition of anxiety, is you're intending a reality that doesn't exist onto the one that is, or you're protecting yourself. And we know the first muscles to fire are the psoas, the hip flexors, those deep fascially woven muscles that connect the lower and upper bodies. They're the first ones that go into, if we're freezing, they're plugged right into our spinal cord and nervous system. They're the first ones to receive the alert, the alarm, to protect or to run. So if we have this low level chronic anxiety or tension whilst we're performing, we're creating an obstruction. And again, as you referred to, your ideal swing is effortless. So we're looking for this balance of intending an outcome effortlessly.
And it's the same with the voice. If you go on tour and you start pushing the voice because you're breathing wrong, because your body's tight, or your posture's off, or you get a little amped up, so you start to throw the sound from these muscles instead of your body, you're 3 days onto tour and you lost your voice. So it translates to so much. It's a beautiful thing. And if we really understood it, if we really understood that anxiety is just a frequency, it's just too much busyness in the head, all we have to do is slow down. And I think it gives us a lot more power. And I've had the opportunity to rub shoulders with Tiger Woods, who definitely would never remember me, and Wayne Dyer. And I remember the first time being able to meet them. And Hulk Hogan actually follows into this box too, where when you saw them at a distance, like 100 yards away, you felt their presence. Like Tiger was in tournament mode, and the crowd moved with this just such enthusiastic force that you knew something magical with, and it was just him doing his thing, just hitting a drive on hole 14, no pressure, first day. But you could feel his presence. And when I got to be around Wayne Dyer, he's from around here, or he passed away, but he's from around here. And I was taking a sunrise walk on the beach, like I often do. And I was with my friend, we were having a conversation, and there was this person walking towards us. And by the time he got 40 feet away, we had fallen silent because there was this electrical bubble around this bald man walking towards us. And you could feel it, like we moved our whole everything 20 feet away. It gives me goosebumps to think about it. There was a force field around this man. And we didn't speak till he was 40 feet behind us. And it was like, who was that? Like he had pulled the electrical, it's magical force up and through and around him and blanketed himself to a point where there was no one else around it. You could totally feel it coming off of him. Same thing happened when I got to meet Hulk Hogan, like 80 feet away. There was this like parting of the seas of people around him just feeding off of this dynamic energy. And it was nighttime, but it was almost like there was a spotlight on him, but it was a party scene and there's no spotlight. It was just clubs and normal lighting. But I remember him and his daughter having these like light beams coming off of their person. Like they were just this dynamic, energetic force. And I really feel like that's what we're capable of when we start to take care of these systems. We can call these other parts of our ability back online.
Which I believe is truth, as you were speaking to before. When we unleash that potential, that is truth, and that is that frequency that creates those goosebumps.
Cool.
Very cool. Very cool. And it's a beautiful contagion. And I believe it does happen online as well. And I want to thank you and honor you for the way that you're doing that and sharing your truth, because I know that you're literally touching a nerve that needs to be touched. You're in the fiddle that needs to be fiddled. Like you're bringing together dots that need to be connected. And yeah, I want to appreciate and honor the work that you're doing there with this Lady Da Vinci energy you've got going on. So thank you very much for the work you do.
Thank you, Sam, for saying that. It's been interesting to handle the new energy. I definitely wasn't interested in bringing my work online. I have a nice local following, and I'm very passionate to bring it to. And if it wasn't for some of my friends, I would have never even started on Instagram. And when it exploded, I was very much delighted with how it's been received for the most part.
It is
thanks for allowing me to.
Yeah, it is stepping onto the stage, right? It is allowing yourself to be seen. And I've had a part of my life where I was very public on YouTube for some different things, and then now I've had a few years stepping back, and it's a choice to make, but it is overcoming a fear. It's overcoming that tension and learning to perceive that tension not potentially as fear and nervousness, but as excitement and enthusiasm.
If I can be vulnerable, I've found myself mostly struggling with violent neuron clusters with people. I think because of my background as a golfer who was on like a D1 stage and conference finals, and then being a performing artist, I got a lot of comfort. You're playing at festivals and playing at wellness crowds of hundreds of people. But when you're singing a song, you just get applause or no applause. If you're at a tournament, you get applause or no applause. But online, in this forum, you actually get a lot of angry people when you are butting up against what they've previously known. And that's been very new for me. And learning how to energetically kung fu myself so I don't take on some of the demeaning, condescending hate, right? Because that's not me personally, it's from them. But also learning how to greet it with neutrality, because I'm noticing that allopathic medicine is protected in people's minds, much like religion used to be. And to confront the norm with something new particularly with people that have 20 years of experience or 50 years of experience in a field, they will very quickly demean and condescend everything that I'm saying. And I point to research that they've never seen. And it's, instead of coming with me with where can I see this or can I whatever, it's an attack. And learning how to greet the attack with neutrality and creating an open-minded conversation. Because I know that in our neuron clusters, how we build our brain and how we train our brain to connect ideas, when they are cemented, we can actually become violently in disagreement with people who question it. And you can see this with government.
Yeah, and question the existence of that cluster, which is felt as ourself. It feels like you're questioning ourself.
So to challenge authority has been bred in me since I was a child. My parents have asked questions so deep that I feel like I'm the creator of my universe. And as I learn, I can build that universe. But it's not on the crux of, I believe the government has my best interest. I believe all doctors know everything. Those have been abolished. But if I'm talking to somebody that says all doctors are the authority of health, you know nothing. All government is here to make us better, you know nothing. This cannot be questioned. This cannot be questioned. We've done it like this for 100 years. That can't be questioned. When I'm saying certain things, it starts to explode. If they can handle it, it starts to explode these things into deeper questions, which to me is expansion. But expansion for some people is violent, and they're going to defend it, because if we challenge that neuron cluster, all of these other things have to be deconstructed. So it's easier to be mad at
what
me
is success
than to question.
What choice did I make in college about which major and why that was going to be better for my career or family or opportunities. It's a ground level cluster that collapses a tower with it.
Yep. So that's, to me, my challenge of being seen and becoming bigger is learning how to be okay and learn okay with the violent reaction that I even get from fitness professionals. And instead of greeting that violence with violence, to create an openness for curiosity. Because I really feel like curiosity can be a driver for so much expansion. But if we're unwilling to ask the question, that's when we close our mind. That's when we get stuck in a box.
Yes, especially now. Now is the time to be asking better questions. We know enough now that questions are the answer, I believe. So,
yeah.
So thank you for asking amazing questions. I encourage you on this path to continue doing that. It is, like your kung fu, deciding when and where to block to protect and cultivate your own energy. So it is a new skill, but a worthy skill in this kind of parallel digital society that we have going on. That seems to be to have less inhibitions of people's darker or more violent sides to come out that they wouldn't usually say in a regular conversation. And
I would really love to just set an example of how we can converse about things that are emotional from a neutral state in a psychology way, just in a prompting the curious nature as a humanity on the same track together.
Mm-hmm. and also,
like, where's the solution?
Yeah, and also like in a conversation that isn't a truly deep conversation, that is like we're in a crowded lounge or a club, and we get a chance to just say something for 20 or 30 seconds, and then something else gets said and something else gets said, and then there's a cat, and then there's a viral video, and it's like there's all this randomness happening that interrupts this conversation. And so having those expectations a little clear as well helps understand that it is that type of light socializing kind of conversation, but the people who are interested are going to start hanging around you as they are. So awesome. Thank you for sharing your perspective as it is now. I can see it evolving like an infinite fractal, as it should. So that's awesome. I'm definitely going to pay attention to your ideas and conversation as you continue it. So Brooke, thank you very much. If you're listening musicalbreathwork.com is where to connect with Brooke and her work. The links will be in the description. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Sam, for having me. I included a couple free handout tips for anybody that's interested in just feeling into this equation, this sequence, a few things that they can do at home to keep their fascia a little more loose, a little less tense. So those are for free for everybody who's listening. And I'm just going to keep doing my great work is what I call it to myself. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is the role I'm supposed to play. And I still feel very much in the toddler stage, really truly probably in the infancy stage with all this information. But it's fun. It gets me up in the morning for sure.
As it should. So tune your instrument. Let it flow. What other bars would you drop from this episode?
It's a rhythm. We are in an inescapable rhythm between our brain, breath, and our body. And by learning to tune that rhythm, you can control so much more of your expansion.
Inescapable rhythm. Love it. There is.
Yes.
You have a choice how to enjoy that rhythm, but you are in the rhythm, so dance.
Yes. That pattern is never going to leave us. This is the pattern we should master. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next one.